In today's video, guys, we're looking at how to really optimize tension to build more muscle in a faster time period. And the way we're going to achieve this is with the intelligent use of exercise strength curves. We're going to look at what exercise strength curves exactly are, why we need to be considering them, and how to carefully incorporate them into your programs. Now, before we launch into this, I first need to make sure that we're all on the same page with something that works hand in hand with strength curves, and that's mechanical tension. Mechanical tension is basically the tension you place on your muscles with external load. High mechanical tension is considered the primary stimulus for muscle growth. The more tension you create within a muscle, the more size you'll build. Now, with mechanical tension established and off to one side, on to strength curves. All the exercises that you perform in your training programs all have what's called a strength curve. A strength curve is basically a graphical representation of the muscular force generated at each point throughout an exercise range of motion. Because of joint angles, the resistance or tension of an exercise isn't constant. An exercise strength curve displays where the greatest amount of the all-important mechanical tension is. The way to explain this is with examples. Let's use the exercise easy bar curls. Easy bar curls have a strength curve known as a bell curve. Let's think about this. When you perform the curl, the lift during the initial concentric phase starts easy and increasingly gets harder until it hits the hardest point, which is the midpoint of the range of movement, where your forearm is horizontal and the weight is furthest from your body. Then as you continue the movement, as the weight moves closer to your body, the lift gets slightly easier again. That's the easy bar curls strength curve, a bell curve. So why is this important to know? Well, as mentioned earlier, mechanical tension is a primary key to triggering muscle growth. Looking at the strength curve of the easy bar curl, we can pinpoint the range where the most mechanical tension is. For this example, it's at the midpoint of the biceps contraction. This is where the most stimulus for a hypertrophy response will be. When you perform this exercise to absolute failure, your point of absolute failure is reached at the midpoint of the range of movement. That region of midpoint biceps fibers are the ones reaching absolute failure, which means you'll fail there first before the other bicep fiber regions responsible for the top and bottom contraction range ever will. Now, some may argue and suggest that you don't need to account for different tension points of a movement, just lift. But the concept of intramuscular regional hypertrophy has been supported on the research front. A 2000 study from the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research actually looked at non-uniform response of skeletal muscle to heavy resistance training, actually looking at the question, can bodybuilders induce regional muscle hypertrophy? So it not only looked at can muscles of a single group respond to growth independently, which in the bodybuilding community already has been believed and practiced forever, i.e. performing different exercises or angles that place more load, say on your outside sweep of your quad over the three other quadricep muscles. But it's the observation that intramuscle hypertrophy can occur that's of most interest, with EMG testing revealing variations within regions of the same muscle, indicating that there is selective recruitment of different regions of a single muscle that can be altered depending on the type of exercise performed. And it goes without saying, the most activated areas during the exercise would experience the most muscle growth due to undergoing the most amount of mechanical tension. Now, with that in mind, the big mechanism that can directly influence regional hypertrophy is the structured consideration of individual strength curves of the exercises in your program that you're following. Identifying them, understanding them, and knowing at what point of the contractile range the most amount of mechanical tension is induced in each and every exercise gives you a huge advantage. So, let's get to know them all. You've already met the strength curve known as the bell curve, where it's easier at the start and the end of the contraction, and hardest with the most amount of mechanical tension at the midpoint. Now meet the strength curve known as the linear ascending curve, where the difficulty is highest at the beginning of the movement and the weight gets easier as you lift closer to the completion of the range of movement. The barbell squat is a good example of a linear ascending strength curve, since it is hardest at the start of the concentric phase, at the bottom of the movement. Linear descending strength curve is the last of the most common strength curves. This is where the weight gets harder to lift as you get closer to the completion of the range of motion. Dumbbell lateral raises are a good example of this, where the difficulty is highest at the top of the concentric movement. Now, knowing that the exercises you're performing have strength curves, where tension is high only in specific portions of the range of motion, you'll appreciate and understand that the way to then create high mechanical tension throughout the entire range of motion for that muscle group is performing multiple exercises to complement and stimulate hypertrophy at all points of the range. Let's just quickly look at another example. Let's take the biceps again. Performing easy bar curls, we already know that the greatest mechanical tension is at the midpoint of the lift. If we then perform spider curls, which has the greatest tension when the biceps is at its tightest contracted point at the top, and if we then programmed in preacher curls, where the greatest tension is at the start of the lift, out of the biceps lengthened position. By structuring these three different exercises with complementary strength curves, you can create high muscular tension at all points of the targeted muscle's contractile range, meaning we're stimulating and triggering complete hypertrophy at the biceps. Let's look at another example just to make sure that we're all clear. Let's take your back. If you were to take lat pull downs, placing the greatest mechanical tension at the midpoint of the contractile range with a bell-shaped strength curve, programmed along with tall standing straight arm pull downs, where you're ensuring you get a tight squeeze and contraction at the end of each rep, and dumbbell pullovers to place the greatest mechanical tension at the start of the lift out of the lats fully lengthened position, you would have achieved high muscular tension at all points of the target muscle. The lats, full contractile range covered. When designing an exercise program, there's a lot of factors that need to be considered and structured correctly for optimal response as a result of following that training program. Accounting for exercises' individual strength curves and varying points of mechanical tension is a huge factor that I personally follow and work into my online client programming. As a take-home point here, guys, go through your current exercise program. Find out the strength curves of everything you're performing. Are they even accounted for? Are they providing your targeted muscles a high muscular tension at all points of each targeted muscle's range? Now granted, I'm not saying that all the contractile points of each muscle needs to undergo high mechanical tension every single session. You may perform a bicep session that the majority of mechanical tension is placed at the midpoint contraction region, using a majority of bell-shaped strength curve exercises for that particular session. But if your program isn't accounting for and stimulating the other points of the biceps contractile range, using ascending and descending strength curve exercises at some point in the program structure, then you are seriously missing out and very potentially limiting your full development potential. However, get this right and follow a program that has complete mechanical tension accounted for via strength curve exercise prescription, and you could be experiencing a whole new rate of growth.